I don't know about you, but I've always found boss fights to be one of the most polarizing things in gaming. Whether it be discussions on who's your favourite or who's the most difficult, you're bound to find heated arguments for or against a boss in practically any game. Sometimes though, there's just some bosses people universally agree are incredibly difficult to master. Whether it's a new mechanic out of nowhere, a broken moveset you can't deal with, or a wonky hitbox, there are some bosses out there where when you come up against them for the first time, all you can say is, how am I actually supposed to beat that? Today, let's have a look at 9 of these bosses, with a note just to say, these are mostly from games I've personally played, so if you have some suggestions of ones that I've missed, pop them in the comments for me to try out. Also a quick spoiler warning, as some of these bosses are final bosses of their respective games. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to see more of this type of content, and here's 9 bosses who when you met them, they leaned in close and shouted,
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up!
I have to include my favourite game in my first ever list video, so please just indulge me for a bit. Most Hollow Knight fans, and even the ones who have heard stories of the bosses of the game, would probably be expecting absolute radiance on here, the true end boss of the whole game. However, given how difficult it is to actually reach this boss, I thought it would make more sense to look at a boss you can find fairly easily, but you also have to beat once before you can fight this variant, Nightmare King Grim. As part of the Grim Troop DLC, King Grim runs a carnival that visits the starting area of the game. Here he tasks you with finding and gathering some flames from his disciples using his extremely cute offspring. He asks you to do this 3 times, then he challenges you in a boss fight, which upon you winning, he'll spin himself up in a cocoon. It's from here you can use the Dream Nail to enter his dream and challenge his ideal version of himself, only it's a nightmare. I feel like because you've beaten him once already, you go in with a sense of false confidence, like a how hard could it be sort of thing. Then the fight starts, and you can instantly see the difference. He's significantly faster, sending up spikes through the ground, then firing bats at you within 0.2 seconds of each other. His dashes rain fire down in almost the exact place you were going to stand, every single time. Then you get his orb attack, where he goes invincible and makes you dance around for the audience in the background. The margin for error is tiny here. Jump a little too late or a little too soon, send out a spell when you should have dodged, you're probably dead. With such a small window for actually attacking, the fight drags on for a significant amount of time, and you need to be dialed in the whole way. The insane speed of this boss, coupled with the fact that every attack he does is actually double damage, as with all Dream bosses, has you walking out of that first fight within about 2 minutes, feeling like you made a mistake walking into his nightmare dojo. Nier Automata from Platinum Games is an action game well known for its bizarre characters, frenetic combat, and insane amount of endings. But it's fairly rare people talk about the bosses of the game, and I have no idea why. They are for the most part bullet hell bosses with a Devil May Cry style combat system, asking the player to move fast, hit hard, and keep moving. By far one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in the game, added as part of the 3C3C1D119440927 DLC pack, try saying that fast 5 times, was the CEO boss fight. Not only is it weird, it's also incredibly hard to unlock, having you complete the 3 combat arenas added in the DLC, then having to repeatedly ask for a fight with you-know-who at the Gambler's Coliseum. Once you're finally given the chance, you'll fight the Square Enix president Yosuke Matsuda, who floats down in his pristine CEO suit and starts destroying you with projectiles. Once you get Matsuda to half health, his buddy joins the fray, the former head of Platinum Games, Kenichi Sato. And so begins the duo fight, with Matsuda spamming projectiles, whilst Sato tries his very best to grab you and start throwing you around the arena. This is an incredibly fast fight and requires you to be on your toes at all times. Once you get them to a certain amount of health, they'll both float into the sky again and utter the words everyone wants to hear at a video game showcase, allow us to give you a parting gift before we leave. And following this, hell just rains upon you for a full minute, which isn't too hard to dodge, but looks absolutely insane when you see it for the first time. Now chances are, with this being a special endgame DLC boss, people are probably thinking, well, this one isn't actually too hard, and you'd be right. But I just love the idea that the CEO of both the game developer and publisher float down from up high to wipe the floor with you. Okay, now we get onto some bosses that will absolutely ruin your day no matter how good you are, starting with the final boss of the game, Sifu. This action brawler from developer Slowclap is incredible. From the art style to the tightness of the combat mechanics they refined over the years, Sifu truly is a masterful experience, and one I recommend checking out. Based on the unnamed central protagonist, we are tasked with getting revenge on the different martial artists responsible for killing our mentor. Armed with a special charm bracelet that allows us to be revived upon death, dying is an expected mechanic in Sifu. However, I don't think anyone who reached Yang in the final stage of this game thought for a second just how much we were actually going to die. Dying makes you progressively age, have less health but do more damage, though none of this is going to save you from Yang's wrath. Up until now, every single enemy you've fought has more or less followed the same rules, being fast but not too fast, taking some hits, able to be countered, and susceptible to the special focus moves we unlock throughout the game. Well, you can throw that all out the window here. Impossibly fast and almost impossible to hit, Yang can break through almost every move you have, the perfect dodge mechanic being more or less the only way to actually get a hit in on him. When you try and do a focus move, he'll just completely ignore it and say, "Don't insult me with that move." Once you deal with Phase 1, you're treated to an even harder fight in the rain for Phase 2, where his unblockable power moves come out thick and fast, and he gains a grab move that can one-shot you, forcing you to die and revive, making you age further. You have to learn this guy's moves if you want any chance of coming close to beating him. And he's on such another level to all the other bosses in an already tough game that he's a sheer standout not just on this list, but any boss list there is. Now we go from an extremely hard boss in a game full of them, to a game with more or less all easy bosses. Then this innocent looking old man shows up, and he shows you why you should respect your elders. Blasphemous 2 is the 2023 sequel to the incredible Metroidvania released in 2019, and sees us as the same main character once again fighting against the twisted religious iconography of the Miracle, a very much Old Testament god that believes in atonement through punishment. I don't think there was a game I was looking forward to more than Blasphemous 2, and once the game came out it definitely didn't disappoint, but it did overall just seem like a way easier and more forgiving game than the original, including with the bosses. This was, of course, until I found this little old man on the way to the end of the game. Everturno, Father of the Penitents, is the first in line of the order you come from, meaning he's seen it all and done it all. Initially the fight lulls you into a false sense of security, with Everturno teleporting around and casting some fairly easy to dodge spells. For the most part, with him being the penultimate boss of the game, you can comfortably dodge most of the spells, but there's unfortunately a reason for that. Once his Phase 2 starts, everything changes. He draws the sword from the chest of fan favourite character Chrysanta and uses it to make your life a living hell. Whilst his penchant for teleporting remains, he significantly dials back the spells so he can start with some screen-filling sword arts. With a good half of the screen taken up by most of his slashes and shockwaves, the majority of which have great tells, but very small delays to mess with your timing. Think you have them down now? Well, once old Evan gets to a certain threshold, he'll pull out his secret move, where the screen goes black, and you need to dodge one single attack from every boss you've beaten in the game up until now, in a row. This man does not care what you have beaten to get here, he will wipe the floor with you and take out the trash without a second thought. You also get a very cool cutscene for finally beating this incredibly difficult boss. Likely never to be seen on PC in a legal capacity, Bloodborne is in my opinion the best From Software game to date. Known as with any FromSoft game for difficult bosses, Bloodborne has a special circle of hell dedicated to the final boss of its Old Hunters DLC. Bloodborne sees you as the hunter on the search for the Pale Blood, something that can allegedly put an end to the beast hunt and cosmic entities plaguing the gothic city of Yharnam. The Old Hunters DLC, however, sends you back in time into a memory of how the city of Yharnam came to have such issues with cosmic entities and beasts in the first place. At the end of the last area of the DLC, the fishing hamlet, you'll find the body of the Great One Kos, washed up ashore and experimented on whilst it was still alive. As it turns out, Kos was actually with child, and just as we get there, we see this child come into the world, and as they stare longingly at the nightmarish sunset in front of them, they realise they're now the orphan of Kos. I can comfortably say that for me, this boss is the hardest one in this list, as opposed to something like Miquella's consort from Elden Ring who seems more like bad design than being brutally efficient. The orphan of Kos was born into the world knowing only loss, and their overwhelming rage is let out on you, the first thing they see. In one of the most metal things you can see in nature, Orphan uses their umbilical cord as a weapon, which inexplicably has a bladed edge. Incredibly fast and punishing on people trying to quick step into their attacks, the Orphan often jumps backwards to throw an attack at you, almost as if they were designed to work against Bloodborne's playstyle. They have an impressive range alongside their ultra high aggression level, not allowing the player to breathe even for a second. You need to make your own space if at any point you want to heal. Phase 2 at half health is considerably worse, where the orphan grows wings which allow it to leap in and out of attacks, leaving even smaller windows for attack amidst now blood and lightning attacks, which can sweep the entire arena, with further attempts at a boss usually allowing you to effectively learn patterns and make them easier over time. The orphan has such unpredictable behaviour that you have no idea if they're going to throw lightning, jump back and swipe, or just start pounding your face into the beach at any time. With the majority of the fight being desperate and reactive, I couldn't think of a better boss for this list. Metroid Dread is one of the few Nintendo Switch games I actually played through to completion on its release. Whilst I've always loved the genre, I've never really gelled with the core series, although I do have a lot of love for Metroid Prime 1 and 2. That being said, I did have a lot of fun with Metroid Dread, right up until the end of the game, where my face was ground into the dirt repeatedly, causing me to very much lose my cool while streaming for the first time ever when I was on Twitch. This honour of course goes to Ravenbeak, the main antagonist of the game. Whilst there'd been a few tough sections in the game and a few enemies that pushed me to my limits, Ravenbeak was something else. His first phase consists of filling the entire screen with energy that will 100% kill you if you want stood in the safe zone next to him. Outside of this, he fires black homing orbs, which you can destroy for ammo, and then his infamous dash, punch and grab combo. You see, the thing is, Ravenbeak is invincible during all of the above, and the only way to actually damage the boss is to shoot him enough times to make him glow red. Only then can you melee counter his dash punch to have a short scene play out where he can be damaged. So not only do you have to dodge screen covering attacks, you have to have perfected the timing of the melee counter in order to even damage him. That's only phase 1 of 3 by the way. Yes, in phase 2, he sprouts wings and repeatedly locks onto Samus, then fires non-stop while you jump around him in circles to avoid being damaged. Once you've clipped his wings in a much easier phase 2, it's time for the coup de grace. Phase 3 is almost the same as phase 1, but with some added spice. Now on top of the screen covering moves, sweeping lasers, dash attacks and teleporting punches, Ravenbeak can now summon a literal sun that sends out energy waves that you'll have to dodge in midair whilst dodging everything else. Similar to the Blasphemous 2 entry, Ravenbeak is just on another level entirely to the rest of the bosses in Metroid Dread. Most of them are like puzzle bosses than anything else, and this is another boss in a whole class of their own for the game that they're in. Back in September of 2017, we learned that not all things that look cute and cuddly are necessarily easygoing when we all played Cuphead for the first time. Famous for its incredible hand-drawn animations and infamous for its deceptive difficulty, Cuphead for the majority of its playtime was a boss rush. However, whilst most people will tell you the scrapyard scientist Dr. Carl is the hardest boss in the game, these people clearly never played the DLC released 5 years later, The Delicious Last Course. With the addition of a new character with a new ability and some new weapons, this allowed Studio MDHR to create some of its most diabolical boss designs yet. That being said, they most definitely saved the best for last. As the DLC story unfolds, you are sent to find the ingredients for the Wonder Tart, a mythical pastry said to bring life back to the new playable character, Miss Chalice. The only problem is the chef who's supposed to be helping you bake the prime pastry is actually evil himself. For those in the know, Chef Saltbaker has to be one of the most painstakingly animated pains in the butt I've ever had the misfortune of fighting. In a fantastic piece of boss design, every attack the shifty chef deploys at you is actually telegraphed in the background of the play space. As you're dodging the limes, you can see him chopping the strawberries, then you roll out the dough dogs to chase you. You'd think that given you can see what's coming next would make things easier, but it just doesn't. Having a citrus bullet hell fly at you while other ingredients dance their way over to bite you isn't as fun or as whimsical as it sounds. If you can survive the initial onslaught, Saltbaker then picks you up, where the evil-possessed pepper shakers sneeze projectiles at you while Saltbaker himself sprinkles mint from the sky. Now unbound from his glass body in phase 3, Saltbaker conjures up some salty tornadoes to dodge, all whilst we jump from platform to platform shooting his heart. This is the home stretch, similar to the platforming section in the Hollow Knight Radiance boss fight, where it's more about staying off the floor than it is about actually shooting the boss. In a boss rush game filled with tough bosses, it's hard to stand out, but the Chef Saltbaker phase 1 alone stands head and shoulders above a good half of the bosses in Studio MDHR's original game. Hades is a game all about making a completely broken build that can make bosses look pathetic in comparison, so why on earth would this game be here? You may expect to see the final boss on here himself, especially when you up the levels of heat for the tougher challenge, but no, this entry was reserved for a boss you can fight completely by accident. In Hades you play as Zagreus, son of Hades, who wishes to escape the underworld by any means necessary. Of course, in doing this, he enlists the aid of some of the denizens of hell alongside that of Olympus. One of the quote-unquote allies he has is the shopkeeper Charon, the boatman of the River Styx. Gold isn't that easy to come by in hell, and when you see a sack of it just lying by Charon at his shop with the prompt to borrow it, you may think, hey, what's the worst that could happen? Well, as it turns out, Charon doesn't much care for having his cash stolen, and will immediately teleport you to his boss arena for scrap. Whether it's massive sweeping slashes with his oar or summoning purple skulls to fly across the arena, Charon can inflict massive damage in a very short space of time, and can easily end a solid run. If you beat him, you have a hefty discount on items in his shop for the rest of the run, but that can be a very big if. I know a lot of people, and especially veteran players, will say Charon isn't really a hard boss, and to a slight extent I actually agree, but his inclusion here is more of a nod to the fact you can very easily get into this fight early in the game, where you have no upgrades or you don't understand how to make a good build, and it's such a fun moment to be thrust into the boss fight without warning. If you haven't played Hades yet, do it. The game's top tier. I feel like I can't help but mention Nine Souls every time I do a list video. It's just that much of an unsung hero in the indie space. That being said, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't believe the game to be a very hard action game, with bosses that push you to your very limits, with none more so than the final boss. After killing the other souls on the space station, our protagonist Yi faces off against Egong, the mastermind of the Eternal Cauldron project, designed to keep the Solarian race lost in a dream space forever. Now, Nine Souls is dubbed as a 2D Sekiro game, which relies heavily on parries, and boy does Egong throw out a million attacks a minute to check you've been paying attention. First and foremost, she straight up uses your talisman attack, something only you can do in the game, prompting you to know all bets are off. After this, you're met with multiple invisible sword slashes, fire on the floor when she dodges your attacks, all before entering phase 2. Here she dials it up even more, sending out waves of unblockable red attacks that need to be countered using the charged parry move, a very time-sensitive technique. You can dodge through these red attacks, but without the charged parry, you're going to find very few windows of opportunities to punish her when her onslaught is so sustained. Depending on your choices throughout the game, you can actually fight true Egong, which results in a third phase even more punishing than the last two. On top of every single move she's done up until now, she gains the ability to dash across the entire screen, sending slices through the air that you have to perfectly parry mid-air, otherwise you'll be cut down and killed. What I fully believe to be the most mechanically perfect boss I've ever come up against, apparently Red Candle Games created this boss fight before anything else in the game, and worked backwards. You can really tell with how great this game's combat is, that they really nailed this fight down. No matter how many hours you put into the game, Egong will make fighting you look like child's play in seconds, leaving your jaw firmly on the floor. And there you have my list of bosses that made me fall to my knees in despair the first time I fought them. I tried not to put too many From Software bosses or the ones you typically see all the time like Sans from Undertale, but if there's enough calls to have them featured, I'm more than happy to do another list, as there's so many tough bosses out there. If you liked the video, feel free to share it around, subscribe, and check out some of the reviews, let's plays, and video essays here on the channel. If you want to come tell me all of these bosses are easy, I'm over on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.